Like I told the kids, and I told you all a few weeks ago, one of the first things I learned to do in church was how to pray, the quote-unquote right way. Hands folded together, head bowed, eyes clenched shut, and then you could pray. I was taught this with all the reverence of learning to tie your shoes and saying please and thank you. I was taught to say your prayers before dinner, before bed, before a big test. We had to pray when someone was sick. Pray when you or a friend were scared. Pray when you needed something. Pray, and like Nike says, just do it. And yet somewhere along the way, most of us learned, whether anyone meant to teach this to us or not, that our prayers are all about getting results. We live in a results-driven world, so it only makes sense then that an effective prayer would garner some type of result in your hands. In the end, can't talk. Fold your hands. Bow your heads just so. Say the right words, and maybe, just maybe, God will deliver. When that doesn't happen, when our prayers are not answered, we quietly, and at times not so quietly, lower our expectations of God. Our prayers change. Take our hands, we fold them maybe now in our lap. And the prayers that we were once going to lift to God turn into a heavy bundle of wishes that we carry along and never turn into asks. Theologian Frederick Bruner calls Jesus' words that Jenny read for us in Matthew 7 the most encouraging biblical passage on the subject of prayer. Bruner says that Jesus opens the doors of faith as wide as they have ever been opened before, because Jesus is promising us an audience with God, and that audience is available for the simple asking. The way to receive God, Jesus says, is to talk to God. That's not nothing. That is absolutely everything. Because here in Matthew 7, Jesus is not giving us a technique. He's not telling you how to pray. He's just telling you to do it. He's giving you permission. Ask, Jesus says. Seek, knock, and then repeat. As if that weren't clear enough. That's just the first verse. Ask, seek, knock. Jesus doubles down in verse 8 and says, for everyone who asks receives. For everyone who seeks finds. And everyone who knocks, the door will be open. It's not a riddle, and thanks be to God, it's not a parable. This is the closest you will ever find Jesus coming up against spiritual law, telling you what to do and how to do it. Jesus is telling us that if you want to be in the presence of God, if you need something from God, if you want to talk to God, all you have to do is do it. Simple, persistent, grace-filled asking. Not a spiritual performance or leverage, but because that is what a child does when they trust their parent. They ask. So why don't we? Why do we turn prayer into worry, to strategizing, to stewing in our own thoughts at 4:30 in the morning after a thunderstorm wakes us up on a Sunday morning? Why do we turn prayer into those things before we are willing to open our mouths and have a conversation with God? Jesus knows our problem is not in the asking. We're asking too much, and instead we trust too little. Our real spiritual crisis is not that we ask for the wrong thing, it's that we hardly ask at all anymore. Jesus doesn't say ask correctly. He just says ask. He doesn't say seek with theological precision. No, just seek, just look. He doesn't say knock with the proper motivation. Just knock. Because prayer is not a tool for the spiritual elites or people who wear robes on Sunday morning. Prayer is our language of trust. And in the light of Christ's resurrection, prayer is our exhale, our of faith. Our refusal to carry the burdens of this life in silence or alone. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was a German theologian. He ran an underground seminary before he was arrested by the Nazis during World War II. He reminds us that the disciples are taught to pray. And so they learn the only way to reach others is by praying to God. Judgment and forgiveness are always in the hands of God, and God opens and closes. But the disciples must ask, they must knock, they must seek, and God will hear them. To put it another way, retired United Methodist bishop and all-around church curmudgeon, Reverend Will Willimon, puts it like this. We thought we were turning to God in prayer, only to find that God has turned towards us. The risky willingness to participate in God's freedom, to curse and to bless, to kill and to make alive, to open and shut, to pluck and to plant is all in God's time. That is Jesus' invitation. Not for God to be a spiritual vending machine, but an invitation into a relationship, a living relationship with a generous God. Not with certainty of outcomes, but confidence in the one who hears all of our prayers. If you're like me, you know that words matter. You know that grammar can change the whole sentence structure and the whole meaning of a sentence. And if you notice the grammar, the choice in Jesus' words, it shifts this entire reading. Jesus' verbs are ask, seek, knock. They're short, they're straightforward, they're easy to remember. But these three words are one single word in Greek. Our prayers can be short, straightforward, and simple. They don't have to be elaborate. Because the promises that follow are elaborate. In other words, grace, the grace of God does the heavy lifting in our prayers. And all of that sounds nice, doesn't it? But let's not pretend that prayer is easy. We all know what it's like. We have all lifted those prayers to God that went unanswered or were answered in another way. We've all knocked at the door, we thought, and been met by silence. We've seen the prayers of others go unanswered. We've seen people hurt. We've stood in hospital rooms praying over loved ones that healing would come, and it doesn't happen. We've prayed for reconciliation, for peace that always feels as far away as it ever did. And it's tempting. It may be even justified to stop knocking, to stop asking, and to stop seeking altogether. And Jesus does not deny that reality. He acknowledges it. He steps into it. Jesus doesn't qualify the invitation to his disciples. He says the risk is real, but so is the promise. Jesus is not concerned that our prayers might be misused or understood. He's concerned that we use it at all. That in our prayers we bring our whole lives before God with the trust and the simplicity of a child. That is when prayer in the light of Christ's resurrection shows its strength. The kind of prayer that does not go away when things don't go our way. It doesn't throw in the towel. It doesn't give up when we don't get what we want. It keeps knocking. It keeps asking. It keeps seeking. Because we're not praying for results. We are praying to stay rooted in grace. Praying because the one who told us to knock is already on the other side of the door. Jesus teaches his disciples, is teaching us to pray because it makes us more like him, more dependent on God, our Creator, more persistent in our following, and more hopeful of God's grace. Bonhoeffer calls prayer the doughtiest weapon the disciple has. Not to get our way, but to entrust ourselves to the God who already knows what we need. God already knows what each of us need before we ask. Our prayers lifted to the God who opens and closes, who gives and withholds, but more importantly has given all of himself to us. Perhaps the best prayers that we can lift today sound more like knuckles hitting wood, the rhythm of repeated pleading. the hollow echo of the hallway outside a closed door. Resurrection means that our knocking is never in vain. We do not knock on the door of a stranger. We knock on the door of the one who knows our name, who knitted us in our mother's wombs, who hears us before we speak, the one who rolled away the stone. So, ask. Ask even when your voice feels weak. Seek God. Seek Christ. Seek God's grace even when you feel lost. Knock. Beat down that door even if you've already knocked. Because the one who told you to knock, the one whose grace is the light that we live in, is standing on the other side of the door. Grace is on the other side. Amen.